I still think about that morning. It comes back to me at strange times, when I'm standing in a queue, when I hear a child laughing too loud in a quiet place, when somebody taps their fingers on a table without thinking about it. Tap, 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 and just like that I'm back there. Back on that cold square in front of the old palace, with the wind cutting through my jacket and my coffee going cold in my hand. Most people don't believe me when I tell them. They smile, the way you smile at someone telling a story they've clearly polished too many times. But I was there. I saw the whole thing happen with my own eyes. And I'm telling you now exactly the way it happened, no extra spice, no exaggeration. It started as the most ordinary day you can imagine. Let me set it for you. It was late autumn in Aldermere. That kind of gray morning where the sky can't decide what it wants to do, not raining, not bright, just this flat, heavy light hanging over everything. The kind of cold that doesn't bite exactly. It just sort of leans on you, gets into your gloves, settles in your shoes. I'd come to the capital for 2 days. A small holiday, nothing fancy. My sister had been telling me for years that I should see the changing of the guard at the palace forecourt, and I kept saying yes, yes, one day. And then one day finally came. So there I was, standing behind the iron railings with a paper cup of coffee, my breath fogging out in front of me, waiting with everyone else. And there were a lot of everyone else. Tourists mostly. You could tell them apart easily. The ones with the big cameras. The ones in shorts who clearly hadn't checked the weather. A school group somewhere off to my left, all in matching yellow caps, their teacher counting heads over and over like she was terrified of losing one. A couple next to me speaking a language I didn't recognize, sharing a single scarf between them, taking turns wrapping it around their necks. The palace itself sat behind those tall black gates, pale stone, rows of windows that all looked the same. It always surprises you how big these places are when you see them in real life. Photos flatten them out. Standing in front of it, you feel small. You feel like the building has been here long before you and will be here long after you're gone, and it doesn't much care about either fact. And then there were the guards. You know the ones I mean. The tall hats, the red coats, the straight backs and the faces that don't move. There's something almost unreal about them when you first see one up close. You half expect them to be statues. They stand so still you start staring just to catch them blinking, just to prove to yourself they're human. There was one stationed near the gate closest to where I stood. I didn't know his name then, of course. I learned it later, the way the whole country learned it. Halden, Sergeant Halden. But in that moment he was just a man in a red coat, standing in a small wooden box looking at nothing. I remember noticing him only because a boy from the school group kept trying to make him laugh, pulling faces, hopping on one leg, waving his hand right in front of the guard's nose. And the guard didn't move, not a flicker, not even his eyes. The boy gave up eventually, the way they always do, and wandered back to his yellow-capped friends looking a bit defeated. I smiled into my coffee, poor kid. I had no idea, standing there, that the same stillness that kid was trying to break wood within the hour be the thing that saved a child's life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the children. It must have been around 10:30 when a small fuss started rippling through the crowd. You know how a crowd moves before you understand why. People turn their heads. Phones come up. A low murmur passes from person to person like wind through grass. I turned too, naturally, because everyone else was turning. A side gate had opened. Not the big main one. A smaller one off to the right, the kind you'd walk past without noticing. And through it came a small group. 2 or 3 adults in dark coats, walking close together, walking the way people walk when they're being careful without wanting to look like they're being careful. And in the middle of them, 2 children. A girl and a boy. The girl was older, 7, maybe 8. She had a dark coat with a red collar and shiny little shoes, and her hair was tied back in a way that had clearly taken somebody a lot of patience that morning. The boy was younger, 4 perhaps. He was holding the girl's hand and dragging his feet a little, the way small children do when they'd rather be somewhere else doing something else. The murmur in the crowd got louder. I heard the word princess passed around in 3 different accents. Somebody behind me said a name I didn't quite catch. The cameras went up properly now, a whole wall of them, and the school group surged forward against the railing so hard their teacher nearly lost her mind. I'll be honest with you, I didn't feel much at first. They were children. Royal children, sure, and that's a thing you don't see every day. But mostly I felt a bit sorry for them. All those lenses, all those strangers. Imagine being that small and having 100 people you've never met pointing cameras at your face on a cold Tuesday. The girl, though. There was something about the girl. She didn't smile the way you'd expect. She didn't wave. She walked with her chin up and her eyes moving, and I remember thinking, that's a child who notices things. You can always tell. Some children look at the world like it's a show being put on for them. Others look at it like they're trying to understand it. She was the second kind. The little group walked along a path inside the gates, parallel to the railings where we all stood. They weren't coming out to us. Of course they weren't. There was a good 20 feet of stone and history between us and them, but the path took them close enough that you could see faces. And the path took them, I realized, right past the wooden box where Sergeant Halden stood. Here's the thing I learned afterward, the thing that made the whole story make sense. That guard and that little girl knew each other. Not in any grand way, nothing official, but apparently on the quieter mornings before the crowds came, the princess used to be brought out to the gardens to play, and Halden was often posted near where she played. And over weeks and weeks, a small thing had grown between them. The kind of small thing that grows between a serious man and a curious child when nobody important is watching. She used to try to make him laugh the same way that schoolboy had, and she'd failed the same way the schoolboy failed. But one morning, the story goes, she'd asked him how he stayed so still, and instead of ignoring her, guards aren't supposed to talk on duty, you understand, he'd done something very small. When her minders weren't looking, he'd tapped his finger twice against his rifle. Just twice. A tiny signal, a little private hello. And she'd lit up like a lamp. After that it became their game. A whole secret language built out of taps. She'd tap on the railing, he'd tap back. 3 taps meant something. 2 taps meant something else. A long pause meant something. It was nonsense, really. The kind of nonsense children invent and adults find charming and then forget. To her, it was the best secret in the world. She had a friend who was a real palace guard and nobody knew, and they talked without words. He taught her one pattern especially. He told her, half joking, that it was the most important one. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. He told her that was the signal you used when something was really, truly wrong, when you needed help and couldn't say so out loud. He'd meant it as a game, a bit of fun, the sort of thing you say to a child to make their eyes go wide. He could not have known. None of us could have known. So, back to that cold morning, the children walking the path, the cameras, the cold leaning on all of us. The little group reached the stretch of path near Halden's box, and I, standing there with my dead coffee, happened to be looking right at them when it happened. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just looking, the way you do. The princess slowed down. Just a little, just enough that her younger brother, still holding her hand, bumped gently into her side. One of the adults said something to her, a quiet word, the kind you say to keep a child moving, and she started walking again. But her eyes, I saw this, I swear to you I saw this, her eyes went to the guard, to Halden, and stayed there. And her free hand, the one not holding her brother, came up and rested on the low stone ledge that ran along the inside of the path. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? A child resting her hand on a wall, it's nothing, it's less than nothing. But then I noticed her fingers move. Tab, tab, tab. A pause. Tab, tab, tab. I remember frowning at it, the way you frown at a word that's spelled almost right. Something about it caught at the edge of my attention without telling me why. A small girl tapping a stone ledge, 3 and 3, over and over. And I looked at the guard. Now you have to understand what these men are like. I told you. They don't move. A boy waved his hand in front of this man's face for 2 whole minutes and he didn't so much as twitch. They are trained to be stone. That's the whole point of them. That stillness is the discipline, and the discipline is the honor, and the honor is the entire reason they're standing there at all. So when I tell you that Sergeant Halden's head turned, I need you to understand what that meant. It was small, so small that I doubt 1 person in 50 noticed it, just a fraction, just enough that his eyes, instead of staring at nothing, were now looking down and to the side, looking at a little girl's hand on a stone ledge. His jaw tightened, I saw that too. And the princess tapped again, 3, pause, 3. And this time, even from where I stood, even through 20 feet of cold air, I could see that her face had changed. The chin was still up, but her eyes weren't a curious child's eyes anymore. They were wide, bright, frightened. She was scared. That little girl was scared half to death, and she was standing in the middle of 3 grown adults and 100 cameras, and not one of them had noticed, because she wasn't crying and she wasn't screaming, and she wasn't doing any of the things a frightened child is supposed to do. She was tapping on a wall, and 1 man in the whole square understood her. I felt the hair go up on my arms. I didn't even know why yet. I just knew, the way your body sometimes knows things before your mind catches up, that something was wrong, badly wrong. The kind of wrong that the morning had been hiding under all that gray, ordinary light. I looked back at the children, trying to see it, trying to understand what she could possibly be afraid of, surrounded by her own people in her own palace grounds. And that's when I saw the boy. Not the prince. The little prince was fine, dragging his feet, half asleep on them, the way 4-year-olds are at 10:30 in the morning. No, I mean another boy. No, not a boy. A man. A young man, I should say, though he was dressed to look younger than he was. He'd come up close to the railing a little way down from me, among the school group, blending into all that yellow. He had a coat that was a size too big and a bag held against his front with both arms wrapped around it. The way you hold something you're afraid of dropping. Or the way you hold something you don't want anybody to take. He wasn't looking at the children the way everyone else was looking at the children. Everyone else looked at them with that soft, delighted, oh how sweet face people make at royal kids. This man wasn't making that face. He was looking at them the way the princess looked at the world, like he was studying it, like he was working something out. And his eyes kept going to the side gate, the small one, the one they'd come out of, the one they'd have to go back through. I tell you, I'm not a clever man. I don't notice things, usually. My sister says I'd walk past an elephant if it wasn't directly in my path. But something about that young man with the too big coat and the bag held tight against his chest turned my stomach to water. And I realized, slowly, horribly, that the little princess on the path, who could see far more than I could from where she stood, who'd been raised her whole short life to watch and notice and stay quiet and stay calm, had seen something too. Something none of the grown-ups around her had seen. And she couldn't shout. She couldn't run to a stranger. She couldn't point and make a scene, not a girl like her, not raised the way she'd been raised, surrounded by minders who'd have hushed her and smiled for the cameras and walked her right back through that gate. So she did the only thing she could do. She used the one language she had that only 1 person in the entire square would understand. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps. Something is really, truly wrong. I need help and I can't say so out loud. And Sergeant Halden, standing in his little box in his red coat, with his rifle on his shoulder and 300 years of rules telling him to be stone, to be still, to do nothing, to look at nothing, to react to nothing no matter what. Sergeant Halden heard her. I watched him hear her. I watched the understanding move across his face like a shadow crossing a field. I watched his eyes leave the little girl's hand and lift, slowly, carefully, and travel along the railing, past the school group, past the yellow caps, until they found exactly what hers had found. The young man, the coat, the bag held tight. And for one long, terrible second, nothing happened at all. The cameras kept clicking. The teacher kept counting her yellow heads. The couple beside me kept passing their one scarf back and forth. The whole ordinary morning kept rolling along, completely unaware, completely innocent, while two people who couldn't speak to each other, a little girl and a silent guard, passed the most important message of their lives across 20 feet of cold autumn air. I gripped my coffee so hard the lid popped off. And Sergeant Halden took a breath. I saw his chest rise under that red coat. I saw his hand shift on his rifle. I saw the stone start to become a man. And I thought, God help me. I actually thought it in those exact words, he's not allowed to move. He wasn't. That was the whole agony of it, the thing I understood even in that frozen second. Everything that man was, everything his uniform stood for, every rule that had been drummed into him from his first day, all of it said the same thing. You do not break your post. You do not leave your station. You do not react. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, no matter what it costs. That was the discipline. That was the honor. And the honor was about to cost a child everything, unless he threw it away. I held my breath. The whole square seemed to hold its breath, though it didn't know it. And Sergeant Halden looked, one last time, at a little girl's hand resting on a cold stone ledge. She tapped once more. 3 pause 3. Please, I've gone over what happened next 1,000 times in my head. And the strange thing is, it didn't happen fast. That's not how I remember it. People think these moments come like lightning, all noise and speed. They don't. Not the real ones. The real ones come slow. They come the way a wave comes when you're standing in the sea with your back turned. You feel the pull of the water around your legs first. You feel the ground shift. And only then, too late, do you understand what's coming for you. That's how it was. Sergeant Halden took his breath. I told you that. I saw his chest rise. And then, for what felt like a very long time but was probably only a second or two, he simply stood there, looking, calculating. I didn't know that's what he was doing then. I thought he was frozen the way I was frozen, but he wasn't. I learned later the kind of training those men carry. He wasn't frozen. He was deciding. He was looking at the young man with the bag, and he was looking at the children, and he was measuring the distance between the two, and he was doing the sum that no one should ever have to do. And the sum came out wrong, whichever way he turned it. Because here's the trap he was in. If he was wrong, if that young man was just a nervous tourist holding his lunch, if the princess was just frightened of the crowd and the noise the way any small child might be, then breaking his post for nothing would be a disgrace. A guard who abandons his station because a little girl tapped on a wall. Imagine it. The shame of it. The story would follow him for the rest of his life. But if he was right. If he was right and he did nothing. You see the trap. You see how cruel it was. He had a heartbeat to choose between his honor and a child's life. And the terrible thing, the thing that I think about most, is that he couldn't even be sure. He didn't know. He just had a little girl's hand on a wall and his own gut and 3 taps repeated over and over. 3 pause 3. And then the young man with the bag started moving. Not toward the children. That's what fooled me for half a second. He moved sideways along the railing toward that small side gate, the one the children had come out of, the one they would have to go back through. He moved with his shoulder dipped and his head down, slipping between the tourists like water finding a crack, and his arms were still wrapped around that bag, and his eyes never left the gate. And I understood. All at once, my stomach dropping like a lift with its cable cut, I understood. He wasn't going to the children. He was going to where the children would have to be. He was going to the gate. I think I made a sound. I don't know. The couple beside me with their shared scarf turned to look at me, so I must have. But I couldn't have told you what I'd seen. I didn't have the words. I just had this enormous, sick, animal certainty that something terrible was about to happen, and I was too far away and too slow and too ordinary to stop it. But Sergeant Halden was not too far away. And Sergeant Halden was not ordinary. He moved. I will tell you about that moment for the rest of my life, and I will never get it right because there's no way to put into words what it's like to watch a statue become a man. 1 second he was stone, the red coat, the tall hat, the rifle, the stillness that 300 years of history had built into him, brick by brick, rule by rule, and the next second all of that just fell away. Like a coat dropping off a hook, he stepped out of his box, he stepped off his post. He broke. And I swear to you, the whole square felt it before they understood it. You know how a herd of animals will lift their heads all at once when something's wrong, before any of them have seen the thing? It was like that. People who hadn't noticed the children, who hadn't noticed the man with the bag, who hadn't noticed anything at all, suddenly went quiet and turned, because one of the still men had moved, and some old part of all of us knows that when the still men move, you should be afraid. He didn't run at first. That's another thing people get wrong when I tell it. He didn't break into a sprint and start shouting. He moved fast but controlled, the way a man moves when running would cause a panic, and a panic would make everything worse. He came out from his box and went along the inside of the railing, toward the gate, cutting across to put himself between the young man and the children, and his voice, when it came, wasn't a scream. It was a command. You stay where you are. I'd never heard a voice like that. It went straight through you. It wasn't loud the way a shout is loud. It was loud the way a door slamming is loud. It filled the whole square in an instant. Every head turned. Every camera dropped. The school group went silent. The teacher grabbed 2 children by their collars without even knowing she was doing it. And the young man with the bag ran. That was the moment it all became real for everyone else, I think. Up until then, you could have told yourself it was a misunderstanding, a guard having a funny turn. But when that young man bolted for the gate, when he broke and ran with his bag clutched to his chest, every single person in that square understood at the same instant that this was not a show. This was not part of the ceremony. This was something gone horribly, badly wrong on an ordinary gray morning. People screamed. Of course they did. Someone near me started pulling at her husband's arm. The couple with the scarf grabbed each other. The school group dissolved into a mess of yellow caps and crying, and the teacher's voice rising into something close to a shriek as she tried to herd them backward, away from the gate, away from whatever was happening. But I couldn't move, I just watched. I watched Sergeant Halden run. He was fast. Faster than you'd think a man could be in that heavy coat and that ridiculous tall hat, which flew off his head somewhere in the first few strides and rolled away across the stone, and nobody ever picked it up, I don't think. He ran flat out now, no more careful control, because the time for careful was over. The young man had a head start and the gate was close, and behind that gate were the children, because their minders, God, their minders had finally understood too, and they were rushing the kids back through the very gate the young man was running for. And for one heart-stopping second it looked like all of them, the children and the man and the guard, were going to arrive at that narrow gate at the exact same moment. The little princess was looking back. I saw her. Over the shoulder of the adult half carrying her now, she had twisted around and she was looking back at the square, and her eyes found the guard, found Halden. And there was something on her face I've never been able to forget. It wasn't only fear anymore. It was something else underneath the fear. It was, and I know how this sounds, it was trust. She was watching her friend come for her, the serious man in the red coat who talked to her in taps. He'd heard her. He'd understood. He was coming. The young man reached the gate first. He got a hand on it. I saw the bag swing as he grabbed for the iron. And I have always thought that he meant to get through, to get to the children, to do whatever the terrible thing was he'd come to do. He got the gate half open. He got 1 foot through. And Sergeant Halden hit him. There was no fight. People always ask me about the fight, and there wasn't one. It was over in less time than it takes to tell. Halden hit him at a full run, the whole weight of a grown man in a heavy coat traveling at full speed, and he took the young man clean off his feet and away from the gate, away from the children, and they went down together onto the stone in a tangle of limbs and red wool, and the bag went skidding across the ground. And then Halden was on top of him, and he had the young man's arms pinned, and he was shouting, really shouting now, for the gate to be shut. Shut the gate. Get them inside now. And his voice cracked on the words in a way that told you everything about what this had cost him. And the minders were dragging the children through, and the gate was clanging shut, and the little prince was crying, and the little princess was still looking back. Right up until the gate closed between them, she was looking back at the man on the ground who had saved her, the man holding down the danger with his own body. And I will tell you something. I will tell you the thing I've never told anyone, because they'd think I was making it up. Just before the gate shut, just before she disappeared inside, she tapped on the shoulder of the adult carrying her, 3 little taps with her small hand. 3. And though there was no pause this time and no second 3, I knew what it meant, the way you know things in the marrow of you, the way Halden had known. It meant thank you. And then the gate was shut, and she was gone, and the square was chaos. There were people everywhere now. Real guards, more of them, pouring out from somewhere, and men in dark suits with wires in their ears who I hadn't even noticed were among us the whole time. And they swarmed the young man on the ground and took over from Halden and lifted him and pulled the bag away with a care that told you they were very, very frightened of what might be inside it. Someone was shouting for everyone to move back. People were running. A woman near me had simply sat down on the cold stone and was crying into her hands. I never found out why, maybe no reason, maybe just because the body has to do something with all that fear. And in the middle of it all, on his hands and knees on the cold stone where they'd lifted the man off him, was Sergeant Halden. His coat was torn at the shoulder. His tall hat was gone. His face was gray. He was breathing in great ragged heaves, the way you breathe when you've run further and harder than your body was built for. And he was looking at the closed gate, just looking at it, at the place where a little girl had been. A man in a suit crouched down and said something to him, a hand on his torn shoulder. And Halden nodded slowly, still staring at the gate. And then he did something that broke my heart right there in the middle of that screaming square. He reached down and he picked up his hat. It had rolled all the way to the railing near where I stood. He came and got it, this big shaking man in his torn red coat, and he picked his hat up off the cold ground and he brushed it off with his hand. Brushed the dirt off it, careful, like it mattered. Like in the middle of everything, the one thing he could still do right was take care of his hat. And as he straightened up, he was close to me, closer than he'd been all morning, close enough that I could see his hands shaking, close enough that I could see, on a face that had been stone for hours, that his eyes were wet. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. He just put his hat back on his head, and he squared his torn shoulders, and he turned to walk back toward his post, toward his little wooden box, to stand his ground. Because that, you understand, was the only thing he knew how to do. They cleared the square within the hour. I remember that part oddly well, considering how much of the rest is a blur. The men in suits moved through the crowd like sheepdogs. Firm and quiet, turning us, steering us, getting us out and away. Nobody argued. You don't argue after something like that. You just go where you're pointed and you're grateful to be going anywhere at all. They took our names, some of us. A young officer with a notebook and a kind, tired face asked me what I'd seen, and I tried to tell him about the taps, about the little girl's hand on the wall, about the 3 and the pause and the 3. He wrote it all down, but I could see he didn't understand it, not really, not yet. How could he? I barely understood it myself. It would be days before anyone understood it, before the whole thing got pieced together, and the country learned what had actually happened on that cold, ordinary morning in front of the old palace. I'll tell you what they found in the bag, because I know you're wondering, the way everyone wonders. It's not my place to describe it in any detail, and honestly I wouldn't if I could. The papers said enough, and even they were careful. What I'll say is this: it was bad. It was the kind of bad that turns your blood to ice when you let yourself think about how close it came. The young man, and he was young, that part was true, barely past being a boy himself, had not come to that square by accident. He'd planned it. He'd watched the family's movements. He'd known about the side gate and the morning routine, and he'd known, somehow, that the children would be brought out, and he'd chosen his moment, and he had carried into that crowd of tourists and schoolchildren something that should never come within 100 miles of either. If he had reached that gate, the experts said afterward, the loss would have been beyond imagining. He did not reach the gate. He got 1 foot through it, and then a man in a red coat who was not supposed to move took him off his feet and ended it. That's the whole of it, really. That's what those minutes came down to. Everything else, the cameras, the crowd, the cold, the whole machinery of an ordinary tourist morning, none of it mattered in the end. What mattered was a little girl who noticed something, and a guard who'd once taught her a silly game out of kindness, and the fact that when the worst moment of her short life arrived, she had exactly one way to call for help, and exactly one person in all that crowd who could hear her. Think about that, I do, all the time. If he'd been posted at a different gate that morning, she'd have tapped on a wall and no one would have known what it meant. If he'd never taught her the game, if he'd just ignored her on those quiet mornings, the way the rules said he should, the way every sensible bone in his body must have told him to, she'd have had no way to reach across that cold air and say help me without a sound. The thing that saved her wasn't security. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't any of the systems built by serious men to keep serious people safe. It was kindness, a small, secret, against-the-rules kindness, given weeks before by a man who had no idea he was building the thing that would one day save a child's life. I find that almost unbearable to think about, in the best way, if there is a best way. Now, I know what you really want to know. You want to know what happened to Sergeant Halden. Because here's the thing that everybody forgets in the rush of the story. He broke his post. He abandoned his station. He did the one thing that every rule of his service, every tradition, every line of his honor told him he must never, ever do. And rules don't bend just because the reason was good. That's not how rules work. That's not how those old institutions work. For a few days, nobody knew. The story came out in pieces. A guard had stopped an attack. A guard had tackled a man at the gate. The country was grateful, the way a country gets grateful all at once, loud and warm and a little bit hungry for a hero. But underneath that, quietly, there was a question being asked in rooms I'll never see. A guard had left his post. What was to be done about a guard who left his post? I'll be honest, I lost sleep over it. A stranger, a man whose name I'd only just learned. But I lay awake in my little hotel bed that night and the night after, thinking about him brushing the dirt off his hat with those shaking hands, thinking about how much that hat had meant to him, what it stood for, and I couldn't bear the thought that the doing of the right thing might cost him the very thing he loved. I needn't have worried, not entirely. What happened was this. There was an inquiry. There's always an inquiry. They had to look at it properly, and I understand that, I do. You can't run an institution like that on feelings. They sat Sergeant Halden down and they asked him to account for himself, to explain why he had abandoned his post. And the story goes, I wasn't there. This is what came out later, but I believe it, that he didn't make excuses. He didn't talk about heroism or instinct or split-second decisions. He just told them plainly about a little girl who used to play in the gardens, about a game made of taps, about 3 taps and a pause and 3 taps and what he'd told her that meant, all those weeks ago, half as a joke. And he told them that when he heard it, real and frightened, on that cold morning, he had made his choice and he would make the same choice again, and they could do with him whatever they thought was right. And then the story goes, he said one more thing. He said, a guard's first duty is to protect. Everything else is just how we stand while we wait to do it. I don't know if those were his exact words. Stories grow in the telling, and I've learned to be careful about the neat lines people remember. But I hope they were. I hope he said exactly that. Because it's true, isn't it? It's the truest thing. All that stillness, all that discipline, all those rules about not moving and not reacting and being stone, what is it all for in the end? It's for the one moment when moving is the only thing that matters. The stillness was never the point. The stillness was just how he stood while he waited. They cleared him. Not only cleared him. In time, and these things take time, these old institutions don't hurry, he was honored. There was a ceremony. I read about it. A medal and words read aloud, and his family in the front row, and I'm told he stood there through all of it with the same straight back and the same still face he'd worn in his little wooden box, as though praise was just one more thing a guard endures without flinching. But the part I love isn't the medal. The part I love came out much later, in a small piece in a newspaper that almost nobody noticed. It said that some months after it all happened, on a quiet morning before the crowds came, a small girl was brought out to the palace gardens to play, the way she used to, and a guard was posted nearby, the way he used to be. And the paper said, and I have no way to know if it's true, but I choose to believe it. I've decided to believe it, that the little girl walked up to the railing near where he stood, and she rested her hand on the cold stone, and she tapped. Twice, just twice, their old private hello. And the guard, who was not supposed to move, who was not supposed to react, who was stone again now and would be stone for the rest of his service. The guard tapped back. Twice against his rifle, so small that no one watching would ever have caught it. A little hello, across the cold air, between two people who'd already said the only words that mattered in the only language they had on the worst morning of their lives. I think about all of it still. The gray sky, the dead coffee in my hand, the school group in their yellow caps, the man with the bag held too tight, and a little girl's hand on a wall, tapping, tapping, tapping into a crowd of 100 people who couldn't hear her. 100 people. And one who could. That's the whole story. That's everything I saw, told as true as I can tell it. People can believe me or not. It doesn't change what happened on that cold morning or what it taught me, which is the only thing I really have to give you now at the end of all this. We spend so much of our lives being told to stand still, to stay in our box, to not make a fuss, to follow the rule and keep our heads down and not be the one who breaks formation. But somewhere out there, on some cold, ordinary morning you'll never see coming, someone is going to be tapping on a wall, quietly, desperately, in the only language they have left. And the whole question of your life, the only question that really matters, when it comes down to it, is whether you'll be one of the 100 who walk on by, or the one who hears,